Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Spoken Mirrors, Far from the Madding Crowds, interview series with writers and literary figures and reprobates of all kinds and colours.
I I
Uh,
meet all three of these categories.
I think you're the first person, Tom Byam Shaw, who is our guest today. I think you're the first person to positively accept those
The
categories.
first official reprobate,
Yeah.
first self-designated reprobate to
Thank you.
appear.
It's an honor.
No,
This
it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much
it
for
is
asking
this
this.
is the sort of an eco special, as it were. This is to
Mm.
coincide with Far from the Madding Crowds sort of nature festival and nature writing, and in typical fashion, we're going to take a bit of a left field tour into ecology, I
Mm.
suppose, and eco literature with as I say, Tom Byam Shaw, who writes, well, I would describe it as, science fiction of a kind and short fiction usually. But I suppose you could sum it up maybe better.
I think rather than directly science fiction, which no knock on science fiction, it's a genre that I do enjoy very much. I prefer to think of my literature as within the weird,
Hmm.
which is a sort of it's not really a genre in its own right. It's a sort of crossing point for a lot of different genres. So a weird story might have elements out of science fiction, but it might equally have elements out of magical realism, fantastic elements, which is, I think, it's the best way to understand ecology
Mm.
uh, and ecological collapse is in this the scholar Amitav Ghosh talks about how science fiction to him is sort of unsatisfying as a reflection of ecology and the Anthropocene because it's a little too divorced from reality. Like it's in a science fictional world, you're not necessarily at the mercy of the elements and at
Mm.
the and you're not subject to the whims of non-human forces in the same way. Like you can, not to be reductive, but you can pull out a ray gun and
Right.
blast, which we can't do now, or at least I don't think we can. So I think that's the best way to
To
understand.
describe it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I suppose sort of following on from that, I was going to say that your writing usually deals with sort of the climate crisis and ecology in that sense. And then suppose a sort of follow-on question would be, what strategies would this weird, capital W weird that you're describing use versus more conventional fiction?
So in conventional fiction, the obstacles or I mean, this is to be reductive about conventional fiction, but it's usually quite sort of easily understood and easily explained, whereas the forces opposing the protagonist in a weird novel, weird story, might you might not ever understand what they are. They might never kind of come into adequate focus.
Mm.
Uh, I hate to bring another scholar into this, but shall I start talking about Timothy Morton?
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
Timothy Morton is another of these scholars writing about the Anthropocene. And the way he talks about climate change is he invents this entirely new category of thing to describe climate change, and that's a hyperobject. And a hyperobject has lots of kind of categories specific to it, as Morton describes. I'm going to quote him directly now.
Mm-hmm.
So a hyperobject is viscous. Whatever it do, wherever you are, it sort of sticks to you. It's non-local, so its effects are globally distributed through a huge tract of time. It forces you to experience time in an unusual way. It's phased, so you only experience any one bit of it at one time. And it's kind of consisting of lots of different little things passed into one, but it's not just those individual things. And that's kind of what climate change is. It's this massive, long process that you never, like, you don't walk out of your door and experience climate change, you know.
Yeah.
You walk out of your door and experience some of the discrete effects of climate change. You can't tackle climate change as a thing. Like, you can build dams and you know, try to reduce acidity in the oceans, and you can cut down on CO2, but you can't ever like strike at climate change as a thing. And the qualities that Timothy Morton is ascribing to climate change are very similar to the qualities that you might experience in a weird story, like the monsters or the ghouls, or the not necessarily malevolent, but just kind of indifferent forces, cosmic forces that you come up against, that the protagonists of weird stories come up against, are meet these categories as well.
Yeah.
So it's a way of kind of talking about the unmanageability and the difficulty in not only opposing climate change and ecological collapse, but our inability to even conceive what this thing that is coming at us is, which is another reason I really like talking about the Anthropocene through weird fiction.
Yeah. So I should clarify, the Anthropocene is the term given to our current geological age, where humans actually have a considerable impact on climate.
And I should say that I'm kind of mixing terms a lot here, and I'm sort of bouncing around what I call climate change, the Anthropocene, everything else.
Yeah, that's okay.
But I want to avoid using a kind of reductive term like global warming, which is only really one part of it. But yeah, thank you for clarifying.
No, it's not a problem. And I'll go even further and say we have a copy of Being Ecological in the shop right now by Timothy Morton.
Oh yes, oh fantastic!
And we also sort of we're going to go into a reading of your short story in a bit, but maybe what sort of writers currently right now kind of are dealing with the weird, or dealing with ideas from the weird?
So the one that gets constantly brought up, and for good reason, because he is very good, is Jeff Vandermeer. He wrote the Area X trilogy, the Southern Reach trilogy, which the first of which recently got adapted into this kind of cult classic movie, Annihilation. I'd recommend both the film and the books of that. They both do quite different things, but both are very much worth your time. And he, I think, really set the standard. If you're talking about the kind of inception of climate fiction in the weird, you have to kind of go to him as and it's difficult because, as I've been kind of explaining, the weird as a narrative mode is just kind of purpose built to talk about this sort of thing, or it might as well be purpose built. But he's really the first person to do it explicitly. I believe he started writing the trilogy as a kind of anger reaction to the Deep Horizon oil spill in the early 2000s. But it's a strange spill. that affects this place in South Florida. It's this unknown event that kind of radiates from this specific place of a more recent vintage. And well, particularly for me, since I finished it not too long ago, there is Always North by Vicky Jarrett.
Yes.
Which is a fantastic piece of Scottish literature about it's you've read this as well, haven't you?
Yes,
Ian?
yes.
Yeah,
and I know her as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Vicky's she's cool. It's like, oh, it's very hard to describe it because it's a lot of different things at once. It starts off as a kind of straightforward narration of a surveying trip for an oil company into the Arctic.
Yeah.
And then about maybe halfway or a bit more than a third of the way through, it takes a sharp left turn and becomes a completely different book.
Yes.
And it flickers around, and it does very strange and interesting things with time, which I think kind of neatly complement the ideas that Timothy Morton has about climate change. It's a weird book in the sense of an adjective, and it's a capital weird,
yes,
capital W weird book, as in it takes place in the mode. Which I would strongly recommend that book. That book to everyone that can get it.
Yeah, I suppose China Miéville is another good sort of.
That's
weird
another
author.
good example. Yeah. Although the thing about Miéville is that he you kind of have to tease some of the ecology out of his work.
Yeah.
He doesn't ever do it. There are a couple of stories where he does it directly. There is a story called Cove Hive in 3 Moments of an Explosion, which is about these gigantic his collection 3 Moments of an Explosion, which is about these gigantic walking oil rigs. And it's almost like an ecological study of these giant walking oil rigs. He doesn't do it directly, but when he does, I enjoy it very much. Or he doesn't always do it directly, but when he does, I enjoy it. And I think to a greater or lesser extent, any writer that's working in the weird right now is, to a certain extent, dealing with the current moment, I guess. There are some great anthologies. There was an anthology that ran until about 2 years ago called Year's Best Weird Fiction. It ran for about 5 issues, and there's some great climate adjacent fiction in there. Lots of stuff washing up on beaches and catastrophic, environmental changes that don't really have a satisfactory explanation, emanating from places. It's all over the place. Yeah.
Well, let's go into your example, as it were, or an example of your writing, just to familiarize the audience. So this is The Follies, if I correctly. And do you want to talk a bit about it before as well?
Sure. Well, I co-edit a magazine, an online magazine centered around Aberdeen, which is where I live and where I'm doing my PhD. And we were doing an anniversary issue for this magazine. So this is something that I wrote for that, but it's an idea that sort of bounced around in my head for a little while since about 2018, when they built or rather when they finished the Windmills out to sea, which you can see from Aberdeen. I can't see them from my flat because I don't have a sea view, but it's...
Well, you don't have to wait for long.
Good stuff. It's so just the idea of these kind of massive structures, and as I looked out at them when they were finished, I started imagining them kind of after in a sort of post-apocalyptic scenario, or a post-apocalyptic scenario, like well into the far future, when no one knew what they were made for, or anything else. There's a novel that I've been meaning to read for a while called Dockerland, which I think deals with something similar, but I think we attack it in different ways. From what I know about the novel. Shall I get into it?
Yeah, for sure.
So this is the Follies. Way out to sea, past the grey reef, stand the Follies. There are 11, but we don't have names for each. They are called the Follies because they were all built at the same time for the same reason. They are dirty white spires, long like our teeth, broken off at the tops. The wisest of us say they were built. We are the seal people. We are the new people. There were people before us, but we are the new people. The old people milked the earth and built the grey reef. They walked on land. We live in the grey reef. We swim in the sea. We reason that the old people built the Follies as they built the grey reef. The wisest of us speak of the power of the old people. They speak of how they chewed the bedrock in their mouths and spat it into the shape of the grey reef, how they walked on the waves, how they cartwheeled in the sky with the gods. For all that, they are dead and we live, and I'll tell you why. The sea came for the old people. The sea was jealous of the grey reef, which once stood on land. The sea was angry that the old people walked upon its waves and drank from the earth below it and cartwheeled in the sky where it could not go. So the sea came to the place of the old people and lapped through the palace of the old people and lapped 3 times at its door. I am the sea, it said, and I have come for your reef and your dirt and your lives. It was then that the wisest of all the old people spoke to the sea and knelt in supplication. O sea, you are most mighty and beautiful, and I know my mistake. Take our reefs with our blessing, and let us live in supplication, and give us your fruits, and give us your fishes, and you may rule our reef. So this one, and the rest of the cleverest, came to the sea willingly, and became the new people. Their teeth sharpened into points, and skin stretched between their fingers, and their hides became thick and mottled. But many of the old people were upset, because they liked to live on the land, and they liked to milk the earth, and they liked to cartwheel among the stars. And these foolish ones built the Follies in the sea itself. They thought the Follies would hold back the sea, so they skipped across the water and clustered around them. The Follies were not broken as they are now. They had heads with 3 blades that stuck out like a starfish. The foolish ones thought they'd be safe. The sea rose in anger and broke the blades of the towers they had made and smote the foolish old people and drowned them. And then it rose up to smother the grey reef, and it gave the new people the things it had promised them. And that's why we live here to this day. I like this story. I like it very much. I will go out to where the Follies are, where few go now, and duck beneath the water. I will dive down to their bases, to the forests of kelp, where they're embedded in the rock itself. I see the shattered wreck of the blades that crowned the Follies, and I'm well pleased. To put my point another way, you should always accept what comes for you. When I'm diving in the deep and I find a crab, a big fat orange one, I'll catch it in my mouth. I'll squeeze its shell with my teeth, but I won't kill it. The crab will fight. It will strain its legs, it will pinch its claws, it will pull and roil and scream with its body. It will go like this until it passes a certain point. The crab will stop. It will give up. It will go limp. It will accept what's happened to it. That's when my teeth punch through its shell. And that's the end of the story.
So, I think the first thing that struck me when I first read that story on Leopard Arts, which is the name of the magazine,
yes,
what struck me was that for me, it only clicked that they were windmills when it got to the blades in the water.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite it was interesting that I just almost came to it blind, as if they were these mysterious structures it was only then that I realized the sort of the direct uh, implication, I guess, of them later in the story. So, I mean, was that sort of so that's something conventional becoming weird or being treated as weird, and then kind of that reveal towards the end? I mean, was that something you were kind of aware of, or were you
I
kind of
think I imagined in the story. I guess I wasn't directly aware of it, but
mm,
part of the impetus for the story was these kind of great structures with a clear point,
yeah,
kind of divorced from their purpose and made kind of not useless, but or maybe useless, just kind of these things which have a specific point just turned into these great big wrecks. I mean, I'll tell you where I got the title.
mm-hmm.
It's do you know what an architectural folly is?
I don't think so. Explain for the
So
audience.
there was, I think there was a fashion in the 18th, 19th centuries to build these. When people came back from the grand tour of Europe, they built these like already ruined, these pre-ruined structures
Mm,
as like garden ornaments, basically, or like land features, or something like that. And I love that I love that word for this story because it's what the windmills become, but it's also just a kind of a
mm,
signifier or a kind of judgment on the reasoning for building the windmills themselves, I guess.
is it an inevitable ornamentation?
Yeah, 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 or like an ornamentation that's sort of forced,
Mm.
that they can't that you can't really do anything about.
Well, I think that's the other interesting thing in the story is that you know you sort of establish a the land people sort of
Uh-huh.
accepting their fate, and sort of and it's interesting that climate change or the climate crisis here is almost gets written or it gets told as a sort of benevolent deity, and I
Mm.
find it interesting the land people accept that fate, but then it twists into saying I like this story. So immediately it's sort of thrown into question that this is a telling of events, again, sort of divorced from that immediate meaning.
Mm. Yeah, and it's a thing that I wanted to do in this story was create this kind of sense of like deep time
Mm,
where people still remember, or the kind of post people still remember what climate crisis was. They still remember what climate change was, but it's become mythologized in their head. And the thing that they take from it is that you should accept your fate.
right.
um, it's it's uh, it's become allegorized in the same way that the windmills without a function become these sort of ornamental structures.
Mm.
The the ruin of society becomes a fable, basically, for these people.
Yeah. So sort of developing onto that, or well, actually not developing on that, just going in a bit of a different direction. Um, so you said you're currently living in Aberdeen. Um, so and because I know you personally, you've lived in
Mhm.
urban areas your entire life, more or less. So Glasgow, Aberdeen, Paris, and
Yeah,
Perth in Western Australia.
yeah.
So I suppose how does that relate? How do you because I think a typical sort of stereotype of nature writing is this connection to the rural.
Yeah.
So I suppose how do you think about the urban in terms of like your literature's relationship to ecology and things like that?
Yeah, I suppose. I guess in relation to other writers who talk about nature, I don't have the same kind of horror of the urban
Right.
that
Yeah.
that some of these kind of newer nature writers have. I was reading an article, I think, in the Spectator about the kind of slightly spooky roots of some of modern nature writing. Like it's I think if you don't you can how to say this.
Well, there's this sort of quite very conservative strain, to put it
Yeah,
mildly,
exactly. Yeah, there's a kind of a
a
sense of,
rejection.
yeah, a suspicion of everything that is cosmopolitan and urban, and that gets bound up in the idea that the cities are somewhat kind of ecologically impure.
Mm,
I don't know. I think what I've lost as a an ecological writer, what I've lost in being further away from nature as it's kind of understood commonly, is I think I would make that trade to avoid envisaging cities in the way that some ecological writers do.
for sure, yeah.
And I think that urban ecosystems are just as interesting
Hmm.
as rural ones. Um, you have, like, fascinating food webs, and always one of the most interesting parts of David Attenborough documentaries for me,
Uh-huh.
is how these kind of natural processes, like there was, I think in the most recent Planet Earth series, there were like lines of turtles migrating across roads and things like that, and there are these, gangs of monkeys in Indian cities that terrorize people.
Right.
um, I remember I went to Gibraltar when I was a kind of young teenager, and I saw firsthand, or I discovered firsthand what it is to be, menaced by urban fauna when I
Right.
was attacked by Barbary apes.
Oh wow. I didn't know that.
yeah, no, well, I mean, not actually attacked, but like they kind of they yelled at me and they tried to grab my t-shirt.
Oh man.
Um, but there's something fascinating about that for me.
Mm.
In the way that you have these natural elements, this flora and fauna pushing up against the up against, human civilization and human structures. What gets lost in a lot of ecological thinking is that humans are a part of the. I mean, they're a part of the world. They're a consequence of ecology,
Mm.
as much as they are a force that that affects it. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I get from living in cities my whole life.
Mm. Yeah. The sort of the human space,
Mhm. Yeah.
or a space dominated, probably the most explicitly,
I mean,
right,
we
by
are
human
we are
presence.
animals. We are animals. We're the most successful animals on the planet, but that doesn't make us
Less
any
animal.
less. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't
Yeah.
make us any less than what we are.
Um. So going on to another bit, as it were. You were mentioning you're doing a PhD at the moment.
Yes.
So I was wondering, and that PhD is sort of on what we've been talking about, the weird, theorizing the weird, and in relation to, climate crisis and Anthropocene and ecological changes.
Yes.
I would say, how what is that relationship like between your theory and your creative writing?
Well, it was really hard
Right.
to start with because I had, and I think I've recently discovered that this is quite common for a lot of PhD students, is that I didn't really know where I was going vis-a-vis the theory, and everything else. But um, it's ended up in like it's ended up complementing it in a
Mm.
way, or the stuff that I get from the theory is can be really exciting, and that can inform how I write the next story or whatever. There's a specific ecological theorist called Donna Haraway,
Yes.
uh, who I absolutely love her writing because she writes theory in the way that people normally write fiction.
Mm.
Like it's very, the prose is very kind of playful, and she comes up with neologisms all the time, and she's kind of sparklingly intelligent and really well spoken, and she brings in these weird concepts to her theorizing, which I can then draw from and use it to I embed the stuff that she brings up in her theory and put it in my fiction,
Mm.
and it's really exciting to draw these lines between scholarship and fiction like that. I enjoy it tremendously.
Yeah.
So I guess in answer to your question, it's almost inseparable at this point.
That's interesting because I mean I suppose there is almost an assumption that creative writing is based on this intuitive sort of
Mhm.
sense of and it's all in some ways it's almost you write from this experiential sense, quote unquote, where
Yeah.
you don't set out to be like, I will discuss this idea in this short story,
No,
but maybe that's not the case.
and I mean, I think you absolutely shouldn't do that.
Sure.
That's it. It's if that's the way that you relate theory to fiction, then you're wrong. But you can spicy takes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it makes for bad
Yes.
story, right? It's like
Yes.
when you have someone with a very strident political point, and no matter how salient that political point is, when they try to just like illustrate it with a story, it ends up reading like a Facebook post or
For
whatever.
sure.
Like it
Yes.
ends up being really boring and turgid and just like suffocated and limited by
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
author's idea. But you talk about writing based on like this experiential, like drawing from this experiential thing.
Hmm.
You experience theory in that way,
Hmm.
and you don't need to like sit down with your anachronistic typewriter and say, today I'm going to talk about symposis and Donna Haraway through
For sure.
by writing a story about giant bugs or whatever. But
Yeah.
you 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 can draw from these ideas and use it to inform the stories that you're already telling, or
Mm.
you can get like a kind of interest. So I'm can I illustrate this? I realize I'm completely rambling and I'm
No,
not
that's
really
no
going
problem.
anywhere. So this person, Donna Haraway, that I brought up earlier, one of her ideas, one of her big kind of conclusions in her work is this notion of sympoiesis, which is how she understands the natural world and humanity's place within
Mm.
it. So the idea of sympoiesis is that there aren't individual animals, like individual organisms as such. We're all part of this gigantic web of systems, right? That's how she sees it. So you have, rather than you and the things in your, like the microbacteria of your gut and any kind of parasites that you might be carrying on you, rather than that all being like all of these things being discrete organisms. They're one singular entity that moves through the world. Like a natural order with predators and prey. That's a singular entity, and you can break down these entities. You can understand them as parts of themselves, but you have to acknowledge that they're part of one larger kind of holistic thing. And she calls them holobionts, which is like which is her way of describing that. And what I do is I don't necessarily sit down and say, let's talk about holobionts in a story, but that holobionts idea, that's interesting. I'm going to use that to sort of or I'm going to interrogate that.
Yeah.
Or kind of try and come at it from a different way. Like, rather than writing a story that explains the idea of holobionts, I will write a story that takes place of the perspective of a person in a society where that theory is understood as a fact, or something like that. Just to give a crude example, you can do it like that. I mean, there are lots of different ways that you can interact with these things and not make it boring, in my view.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a very contemporary turn, I think. This sort of theory fiction is kind of the name of this blending of them.
While we're going into weird writers who also do theory fiction, this is one for the really committed, I don't know, people who might be listening to this, is Reza Negarestani's Cyclonopedia,
right?
Which is an absolutely bonkers piece of theory fiction, which is like half history of the Middle East, like history of modern conflicts of the Middle East, and like a sort of cosmic horror story where the evil kind of entity is oil itself. Oh, it's nuts. It's fantastic.
And I mean, on a personal note, I think one of my defining memories of maybe just ever was, I think, New Year welcoming in 2018, and you reading in Edinburgh. I think we were in some car park in Edinburgh waiting for the fireworks, and you brought out that copy and read out a paragraph
from Cyclonopedia.
you read out a paragraph about like oil being sentient or something. I was like, oh man.
Folks, I may have been twisted that night.
But it's definitely. I mean, I suppose a different dimension of that is, creative critical writing or autofiction is maybe is that you would see that maybe that's the term for like literary fiction, or literary when it's defined as literary fiction, which is this kind of domestic, quote unquote.
I mean, I think literary fiction gets a lot of slack for the stuff that gets snuck in under that term.
For sure.
Like, it's a very, not wanting to derail the discussion or whatever, but literary fiction, it includes some of the most interesting books in the world, like the most interesting books that you can publish.
Yes.
And also, I don't know, like TV presenters' vanity projects or whatever.
or a middle-aged couple getting divorced.
Yeah. But I think that's also like kind of that. I feel like sci-fi authors and speculative fiction authors love to kind of snipe at literary fiction, saying, "Oh, it's all about couples getting divorced," because no one takes them seriously. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself and out of myself.
That's a quote. So I suppose just to finish things off, what are your current projects? Do you have any future plans, etc.?
Well, I'm finishing my PhD thesis. I should be done with that close to the end of this year. I'm considering attending an academic conference in Karlstad. I've yet to formally apply for that, but I have an idea for a paper.
Nice.
More short stories, more. I'm going to see if I can put together a collection after I'm done with the PhD, or perhaps just publish my thesis as is, without the analytic component, I think. I'm not going to be stopping writing anytime soon.
Brilliant.
Visit Leopard Arts, by the way.
Yes.
That is, if I have one thing that I'm allowed to plug, it's going to be that.
Okay. Yeah, Leopard Arts is a really good magazine, Aberdeen cultural magazine, doing very good work. I'm not just saying that because they've published far too many of my own pieces.
It's more than just odd stories about bugs, I promise.
Yeah, it's a wide range, actually, yeah.
You can go there and read so much stuff that isn't of mine.
And on that note, thank you so much, Tom, for speaking to me today.
Thank you, Ian, and thanks to Far From the Madding Crowd. It's a wonderful little bookshop, and I'm enthralled every time I visit.